The food basically is, I would not rush into a restaurant in Toronto to eat that kind of food. I really wouldn't rush. However, if you didn't eat it, you starved. So you ate it. It wasn't great because everything was dehydrated. It wasn't real potatoes, it was powder. It wasn't real anything. Everything was powdered. You know, they just popped it in boiling water and you had it. Because at that time, the frozen food craze really hadn't taken place yet. But they had a system of taking this and condensing it into some sort of thing that you threw it into boiling water. That became your soup. That became this, that. Never had a real potato. They're all dehydrated potatoes. The tomatoes are really non-existent. The only thing you got that was good was in the morning you got your either porridge or some other thing that they gave you. And you ate it. And I built up from 5'8" at 155 to 5'10" at 170 because I ate that food. And it was okay, you know, listen, it was okay. If you came, and I was lucky because, you know, my mother still gave me a nickel to buy a couple of things, but if you came from a family that didn't have that and didn't have decent food to eat, that food was great. That food was great. I wouldn't buy it, but if they give it to you and that's it, you eat it. I lost a couple of good friends, and that ship going down with the wounded veterans up 2-3 times a year, I break down over that. I do, I just, because we couldn't help them. When you're sunk, there's a chance that you're going to live. Another ship will come along, pick you up. But there are times like when the Athabascan got sunk, and I think about 70 or 80 were picked up by the Germans as prisoners, 7 or 80 were picked up at the Haida, and the other 70 or 80 died in the water. The Haida couldn't hang around and pick them up because the German coast was like right over there, and there were more things coming out at them, so they had to get off, so they had to leave these people to die. In the North Atlantic, if you hit the water, you had 6 or 7 minutes to live, basically, because you'd freeze, you'd hypothermia, whatever the hell they called it. That's what you'd get, because the water was like ice cold. I was, you know, where I was brought up as a kid, I wasn't really afraid of anything. We played hockey, we fought, we this. I wasn't afraid of anything. I wasn't afraid of anything here. The only thing that gets to you is when you lose a friend, or you see people are in trouble and you should help them and you can't. And that's till today. Yeah. First of all, I was a volunteer, number one. And everybody, 90% of the people waited until they were called. 19. I enlisted. I said, I'm going to be called anyway in 5-6 months. Well, I'll go now, you know. And where I come from, like our school was very, very monarchist insulated. To us, king was the king. It was like God. It really was. That's the way we were brought up. And today, you know, forget it. But that's the way we were brought up. We were brought up that when King George died, my mother had a complete breakdown. Took a month and a half breakdown. Why? Her king died. We were hurt. It was hard because jobs weren't that readily available. That's number one. So I went to one interview, I'll never forget it, and this fellow says to me, did you learn a trade while you were in the service? I says, no. I said, some people learn trades, they become soakers, they learn about engines or whatever. I said, I never learned it. He says, they must have taught you something. I said, yeah, what'd they teach you? I said, they taught me how to kill people with a gun or by my hands. We'll call you if we need you. Guns. I didn't like guns. They did awful things to people, awful things. Didn't like them. And I was a loader of this big thing on an Oregon. The thing used to go get red hot, take off, another one on. And I was on an Oregon, like, just in case the gunner got killed, I would take over the Oregon, and so I learned how to use it. It was difficult, you know, for a kid off the street that, you know, at the end of the war, near the end, they were still drafting people and they were sending them home right away. They didn't need them in 45. And these kids would come in, university students and whatnot, they're all ready, the war's over. So it was something that I've never forgotten. I've never forgotten because of what I learned there. I learned and I became a man there, basically, I did. There were always rumors floating, but nobody knew for sure. Nobody knew for sure. And I couldn't see how people could actually do what they did. My eldest daughter, her father-in-law was with the American Army. He says, and he fought with Patton. He says, they were coming once, and they hit a village, and it wasn't far from one of the camps. Did you know what? We didn't know anything. We didn't know anything. He says, they killed everybody in the village. Men, women, children, and kids, they killed everybody. Because they saw what was happening. That wasn't Auschwitz or whatever. They saw what was happening, killed everybody in the village. Came to another one, everybody in the village, to the camp, you're going to clean up, get rid of the corpses and everything else. And whatever. He said, the Americans that came through would have wiped everybody out when they saw what was happening in the camps. And it's not just Jews. There's a German pastor, Niemöller, I think he was, that came out, bang, they put him into the camp. There were a lot of people. I have to tell you an experience that I had, like in my civilian life. I spent a lot of time in the Orient. I used to go to China, and Hong Kong, and Japan, and Taiwan. And I'm on a flight once from Hong Kong to Taiwan, and there's a German guy sitting next to me, and we started to talk. And I said, you know, this thing, he says, yeah. He says, you know, the Germans are today phenomenal. Friends, phenomenal, great. I used to go to Germany 4 times a year, up until a few years ago. He says, the thing that really got us, he says, you couldn't do anything unless you joined the Hitler Youth. If you didn't join the Hitler Youth, you couldn't do anything. He says, when we realized what was happening, he says, my father's doctor was Jewish. He says, and all of a sudden, he disappeared. And my father used to come home and says, I don't know what happened. He says, I went to see his office was closed, disappeared. That's the first time, he was a kid then, that we realized what was happening. A lot of them just didn't know. Most of them knew, there's no question. A lot of them just did not know. Anyway.
So it's
That was the Irish Mafia, except for me.
okay.
Deep Brook, Nova Scotia, on Sunday March. There was about 2,500. The base eventually held 10,000, but it was brand new when we were there. So we just marched along as good little kids. Left, right, whatever. This was Newfoundland in the winter with horse and wagons. Newfoundland was a very, very poor colony, And the horses and sleds were very common, and St. John's was like Toronto in Canada. It was the biggest city in Newfoundland. This was Bermuda, H61. Yeah, that's the destroyer that I was on. And that's the one that's written up here. This is from newspaper 1944, from August 1944, before any of you or your parents were born. Oh, this is my Corvette. That was the Belleville. I commissioned that. This is the commissioning of it right here in Ontario. And I was a senior seaman. I was holding the flag here. This was taken with me in Newfoundland when I was on guard duty with gators. And I'm the little fella.
Which one is? Who is he?
I'm in the middle.
Oh, okay.
The little guy.
Yeah.
I was 5'10". This guy was about 6'3", and he was about 6 foot. This was St. John's, Newfoundland. This was the captain's headquarters for the Canadian Navy in St. John's, Newfoundland. The Newfoundland Hotel. That was basically the headquarters. We went down for what we call working up operations, and we went down as far as Bermuda, and that was taking a friend of mine in Bermuda. And we met a turtle there that was 150 years old. I don't think he's alive today, but then he was 150 years old. This was a Corvette I was on just for several weeks. That was 1945. That was right near the end of the war, as far as we were concerned. 39 Star is the most important one that was given to people that just like my Navy qualifications. Personnel who had 6 months service afloat in areas of active operations prior to May 1945, which I did. I had 400 or something days there, something like that there. France and Germany Star. This is the France and Germany Star. This is regarding the invasion of D-Day, regarding the invasion of France. The Volunteer Service Medal with the bar. The bar is given for overseas service, a minimum of 2 months outside of Canada. That's a Canadian, this thing here. And the War Medal was just given to anybody that was in the war.